something that's going to be extremely powerful and important for mental illness research and detection is using machine learning and artificial intelligence together with biosensors to stratify patient populations. And there are already some companies that are doing that. We just need to implement it better. We need to do more of it. And we need to have more options. We need to have more companies that are doing it so that they don't have monopoly on it. Sorry, guys. But also so that we can extend beyond specific focuses, right? So a lot of the focus has been on trying to stratify which patient groups are going to have depression or going to have, are going to fall out of treatment or who's going to be treatment resistant. These are a lot of structural barriers that we're now trying to identify so that we can tailor the therapy much more effectively to those patient groups. So machine learning and AI plays a huge role in that aspect. But right now it's not really being combined with biosensors yet. When we start having biometric research, biometric data implemented into these machine learning algorithms, then it's going to be, it's going to be really difficult, but it's also going to be a game changer in terms of how much predictive value we can have when we are trying to address a person's mental health presently and in the long term.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the D4 Data Channel podcast. I'm your host Deepak, and with me we have Ms. Pernille Bülow. Pernille is a renowned expert on mental health and illness. With over a decade of research experience, she has made significant contributions to the field through her writing, consulting, and board positions. Her extensive educational experience, including a PhD in neuroscience from Emory University and a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard Medical School, makes her a well-respected voice in this industry. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Pernille, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So I have a couple of questions for you, and starting with this one. So how have digital technologies such as smartphones and wearables already impacted the prevention and treatment of mental illness?
They've done a lot, and then they've not done enough. So there's a lack of research that's really demonstrating exactly how they're the most effective in helping people with mental illness. So where we have the most encouraging data right now, in my opinion, is the research that has been done to demonstrate that wearables can be used to figure out biomarkers that are specific to mental illness. So either for detection of a mental illness or predicting the onset of a change of mental state. So for example, in bipolar, going from manic into depressive. We're still waiting for a time where a wearable is scientifically demonstrated to actually pick up on significant changes or even subtle changes in people's moods that can then have a significant impact on mental illness treatment.
Right. Got it. So how can biosensors specifically be used in the prevention and treatment of mental health care conditions?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the ability to use voice analysis and other types of and movement analysis. These are very, very simple types of biosensors. So for example, capturing what does your voice sound like? What is the language you're using? How much are you moving from day to day? Or even things like how much do you communicate on your phone? All of these things are capturing aspects of who you are and what you do, and they're all falling into that biosensor category. And what research has found so far is that using these sensors and trying to figure out, okay, are you moving less or are you moving in a more stereotypical pattern? That can tell us whether or not you might be suffering from schizophrenia, for example, or be going into a depression.
Right. So in terms of ethical considerations, like what all things we have to actually consider when using these kind of digital technologies in the mental health field?
Yeah. So that is something that's an ongoing conversation that frankly, there's no legislation on this. So there are two ways of looking at it at the moment. One, there are all of the wearables that people are already using in their daily lives, right? So the number of people that have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or, you name it, any type of watch, that is a biosensor. And that data oftentimes is proprietary to the company. And what the company does with that information is up to them. And so that is a person who is buying an equipment, and they are allowing the company to have insight into their information. And so you can start asking things like, is that ethical? What can they do with that data? I'm sure it's probably in the fine print of all of those companies when you're buying the device, but you don't read it, right? So you don't necessarily know exactly what it is you're giving them access to. On the other hand, there's a huge opportunity in that, because those companies get so much data. And if they can pair that with things like, oh, did this person have a mental illness or develop one later on, they could actually start gathering a really informative data set for researchers to dig into and try to find some really meaningful biomarkers with biosensors. Then there is the other aspect, if you want to go through the research part, where you want to ask, what are the ethical consideration of a researcher getting access to all of the different biometrics data, and then realizing, oh, this person, has all the biomarkers that predict they'll get schizophrenia. Do you tell them that? Is that something that you go in and tell a person? It's kind of like saying, you see that their brain looks like they're about to have Alzheimer's, but they don't have Alzheimer's yet. And so are you triggering a mental illness by telling them that it looks like you're going to be having schizophrenia just by saying it? These are, I think, some really interesting ethical discussions that may or may not be, urgent. But I think they're definitely something that we need to start diving into before all of the biometric data is being more publicly available.
Right. Well said. So, regarding the accessibility issues, like how can we ensure that these technologies are accessible and affordable to all individuals seeking mental health care?
That is going to be that is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And I think the easiest way, now I'm in the US and their insurance companies dominate the healthcare sector, right? I think the easiest way to make that accessible would be to make some of the devices, the wearables, insurance covered. So it's something that you can get maybe with, you only pay an aspect of what it would normally cost to get that device. It's still an issue because there are some people that don't know how to use it, right? So accessibility is not just money, it's also knowledge. So you're going to have some people that might not know even how to use a smartwatch, right? And even if you give it to them, they might not use it just because they don't understand. So you have to think beyond just providing stuff for people and actually giving them the knowledge and understanding. And so then we start talking about things like psychoeducation as to, how does this stuff work?
Right. Got it. So, how do digital technologies compare to traditional methods of preventive care and treatment for mental illness?
Well, that's fundamentally those two totally different things, right? Because the traditional methods are, you're in person, you're taking a survey, you're taking a clinical interview. For prevention stuff, here in the US, whenever you go to the doctor on an annual visit, you'll typically fill out a little survey where it says, have you been feeling sad for the last 2 weeks, right? And stuff like that, that's trying to kind of capture, oh, maybe this person is depressed. If that is the case, then they can start pulling out like, oh, okay, maybe we should try to take you to a therapist to address this. But oftentimes, those surveys don't necessarily capture exactly what's going on with that person. And sometimes people also lie. So they'll say that they're not sad when they're in fact sad, or they'll have forgotten it because there's recall bias. So oftentimes people remember exactly what happened the day before. Did you feel sad or happy the day before? Then that's what they'll report on the survey. With wearables, it's a totally different, and biosensors in general, which your phone in itself could be considered a biosensor. It's a totally different story, right? Because you're getting data from the last 2 weeks, for example. You could say, hey, please upload all of your data from this wearable from the last 2 weeks. And then we're going to look at that data rather than looking at, just the answers to your survey. And then you can see, oh, you moved less compared to the last session where you were here. We can see that you had less communication with people since the last time you were here. We can see that the tone of voice changed so that your pitch or jitter sounds different now. And that actually is an indicator that you're depressed. And so you're getting a much more comprehensive and wholesome perspective on who that person is and what they're currently going through. And this extends beyond mental illness because you can use these same sensors for detecting Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism. This is not just for mental illness. This is a completely different way of thinking of how we could try to empower the healthcare system.
Understood. Got it. So I don't know whether it's a potential risk or challenge actually, but like, what are some of the downsides when we rely too much on the digital technologies in the mental health field?
Yeah, I think people can get addicted to anything, right? And people can also get addicted to the idea of having to measure everything about themselves. So was my heart rate variability good last night? Or did I sleep that X amount of hours that I know I need to? We become this quantified self, which I don't think is a good thing. Like, I personally I don't have a wearable. I do not quantify myself. I live my life without having any numbers attached to it. We know that some people, for example, that get stuck on a diet or get stuck on, really going to the gym a lot, start getting kind of obsessed with it. It becomes their way of asserting control in their life. So, they need to really regulate this diet even more and more and more. They need to go to the gym more and more and more. And I think the same thing could end up happening with wearables, where it becomes, well, if my heart rate variability has not been good enough this night, then, I need to do X, Y, Z to kind of restore that. I think an obsession, that's where we could be headed. And that is something that is never healthy for a person's mental state. You don't want to be obsessed with it. But I think for anything that has to do with interventions and, detecting illnesses, it could be, it's really, really powerful, but it definitely has a downside, in my opinion.
Yeah, same here actually. I also don't use much of wearables, and I don't track. But like, so recently I had a conversation with one of my friend. Like, he was kind of having a smartwatch, and like I was asking him like whether are you tracking it daily. So what he does is, even when we are eating, and the moment after we eat some food, like maybe, like, let's say, when the friends gather around, like, we definitely eat some junk food. So after that, like, he will definitely show me like this is the difference. So people, yeah, like, people track a lot nowadays, and
Yeah, they
yeah.
really do. And, calories, that is something that's easy to obsess over. And people already have obsessed over for many, many years, right? But now we're starting to obsess over things like, what's my heart rate? What's my pulse? What's, and all these things, again, they are actually really informative. But are they informative in that moment? No, maybe not so much. I do, yeah, there's so much to say there, but I do think there is a worry that people could become obsessed to an extent that's not healthy for them.
Got it. Right. So onto the implementation side, like, how can we effectively integrate these technologies into existing mental health care systems and practices?
Yeah, so I already kind of touched on that by talking about how we could, for example, have people upload all of their wearable or biometric data, from the last 2 weeks before they go to their annual physical appointment. Something I think, so on top of that, something I think is really, really valuable is, one, integrating this wearable data into your therapy sessions so that your therapist or healthcare person can get a look into what does it look like in your daily life. And there are companies that are now developing platforms to do that. And And then another thing that I think is really valuable in terms of the intervention aspect of mental illness is just-in-time therapy. So just-in-time therapy is aspects or is a method to try to capture people where they're at. So if your heart rate goes above a certain rate, then you could, so then imagine the just-in-time therapy would basically buzz on your phone and say, hey, we're noticing that your heart rate is really increasing. Are you maybe having a panic attack? Maybe you should, if so, maybe you should try to, practice your meditation, breathing, whatever, that you have learned that you've been practicing with your therapist. And here is an article where you can read more about it. So it's reminding people, hey, this is what you could be doing right now to help yourself feel better, just like we talked about in therapy. So you practiced it in therapy, but now you actually get to do it in real life. And this is a huge disconnect that currently exists between seeing a therapist and then real life mental illness, where you can have, if you're living with panic attacks or any types of really intense anxiety, can be really, really difficult to remember or engage in those types of activities that you've been practicing during your therapy sessions. And so how can we help people start doing that? I think Biosensors integrating that with an app where it can remind people is really powerful. It has could really change the way that, therapy success is being measured as well.
Okay. Okay. So, how can we stay up to date with the constantly evolving landscape of digital technologies in the mental health field?
That's a great question. I mean, that's something I'm currently, just doing my best at. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I think finding some, so I follow different companies and try to just see where they're going, but then I have a bias towards those companies. And of course, I want to keep my mind open constantly about what are all the other new budding companies that are coming out there, or an old company that is trying to now enter the biometric market. I think having a broad view, reading a lot, finding people that you think are reliable sources of information, that you think have a lot of knowledge on this, and following those people. That's what I do a lot. Again, I'm mostly on LinkedIn, but I'm sure I'm not what the situation on Twitter seems to be a place where you may or may not get reliable information nowadays, but finding people that you trust that can be good informational sources, I think is my best bet here, because it's a very very fluid area of development, and so there are new companies entering the market and companies exiting the market all the time.
Right. Right. So in this era, you might have actually observed, so how good are the connections between mental health care professionals and peer support networks?
So what you're saying is how peer groups are going to be involved in
Right.
mental
Right.
illness,
Yeah. Yeah.
in specifically
In
with
this
technology?
way. Yeah. In this way. Right.
Yeah, I think something that could be interesting, and this is kind of already, I mean, this is definitely already a thing, where you're having, peer group support. And so there are different websites where you can just join in anonymously sometimes and be a part of a peer group. I'm sure that there are probably group therapy sessions where they also extend into some kind of app with a peer group support. So I would guess that is already happening. I do have I have written quite a bit on the role of peers and community building when it comes to mental illness, and how that could in itself be a treatment style for mental illness. And that's something I'm very passionate about. Whether or not that intersects with technology specifically in a unique way, I'm not sure. But I think that those two will be very, very important ways of tackling a mental illness.
Understood. Understood. So, could you talk about your journey in this phase and your experience educating others with your blog post and articles and so on? So.
Yeah. So yeah, my communication extends to a lot of different avenues. So I've been doing a lot of life coaching in professional coaching, but I've been pretty embedded with people that have been living through eating disorders, anxiety, depression, and working as a life coach for them. My main focus there, I'm not a therapist in any way. My main focus there is focusing on identifying what gives those people purpose in life, so kind of figuring out, okay, what is it actually that makes you want to live? What is it that makes you want to go that next step even when everything else falls apart? And so I spend my time a lot doing that, which is obviously a really, really meaningful, really meaningful journey. On the other hand, I'm only reaching very few people at a time, and that's where I feel like the writing aspect comes in. Psychoeducation. So psychoeducation is the ability, or is where you're learning about why your mind and your body is reacting in a certain way to the things that are happening around you, and then why you might develop maladaptive coping mechanisms, which is basically a mental illness sometimes. And so why that is normal, why that is a very natural process that a lot of people go through, and then how can you help yourself? That is a scientifically validated method to combat mental illness and to prevent its onset as well. And so something that that frustrates me and blows my mind on a regular basis is how little we utilize psychoeducation, given that we know that it's a scientifically valid way of addressing mental illness. So my articles are really focused on psychoeducation. I have my own newsletter where it's very zoomed in on, what happens when you're grieving? What's the neuroscience of that? And how can we destigmatize grief? How can we destigmatize depression, eating disorders? And then I write for Psychology Today, where I try to zoom in on the personal experiences and take those interviews that I have with people that have childhood sexual abuse, that have intense life trauma, that have had substance abuse addictions, and say, okay, this is a personal narrative that's really powerful, but how can we root that in the science and kind of give some perspective, to understand if you're also feeling like my interviewee, it's not unnatural. It's actually something that we can understand scientifically. And then I just founded a nonprofit called Mind Blossom. And the whole mission of that is trying to implement psychoeducation into schools and also using it as a professional development tool in companies. And all of this is literally just relying on this very simple principle of giving people knowledge, which will empower them in their own mental health journeys.
Right. I also agree to the same actually. Like in my organization also there's an application which is enrolled for like all the employees. So it's called Calm,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it actually gives a lot of what to say, like daily small exercises in the form of like meditations and other, like we can select definitely, like so the
Mhm.
people who like music they can actually opt to that kind of a path. uh,
Yeah, yeah. A lot of
so
companies are getting into that. Calm, Headspace, Happify. The challenge with those, and I love those apps, don't get me wrong. I think they're great and everybody should keep using them. The issue is that, one, they don't work for everybody. And two, they're not scientifically validated. So even if we have like a great, selection of personal stories that they are working, or we may have some internal research that's been done by that company saying that it works, we don't actually really know. And so that is my main hurdle with that, where I would like to see that we're implementing skills and technology and strategies that we know will really work. And then people, should also have access to these really cool apps that can give them that extra support that they need in their daily life.
got it, yeah. So that covered all my questions for today, Pernille, and thank you so much for shedding light on this important aspect and talking through about these interesting topics and sharing your experience. So it was great talking to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I appreciate it.